Emily, the Major Tim Space mentor.
And I'm Florence Derrick, the Major Tim Space 2022 to 2023 Young Ambassador.
And today we are here interviewing Owen Sharp, the Chief Executive of the Dogs Trust. Could you please introduce yourself, Owen?
Yes, of course I could. I'm delighted to be here. So yes, as you said, my name's Owen. I am Chief Executive of the Dogs Trust. I've been there for about 3.5 years, and it's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you.
Mm-hmm. My first question for you is, what current campaigns do you have for making owning dogs and looking after a dog easier?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a really big and important issue at the moment. So the biggest campaign that we've got running at the moment is really to support people with all the challenges of the cost of living. And one that we're doing is we're campaigning to try and get the government to reduce or remove the VAT on dog food and pet food in general, as well as on vet fees, because we know that lots of people are struggling to look after their animals because they can't afford it. So we've said to the government, you should take VAT away from dog food and vet bills for the next 12 months because too many people are having to give up their dogs. So I know there's a link gone up. If anybody would like to go to that link and sign a petition to ask the government to suspend VAT on pet food and other costs for 12 months, that would make a huge difference.
I actually haven't signed the petition yet, but I will be signing it afterwards.
Good to hear. Thank you very much.
I also have a question. I've read about I've read about that before you were I can't pronounce it now. The CEO of Dog Trust, you were an A&E nurse?
Yes.
Was there any, what made you change your mind between the, very different platforms?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, feels like a long time ago, but you're quite right. I started my career in nursing, and I was an A&E nurse. I trained in Glasgow in Scotland, and I worked at different hospitals around the country. And then after a while of nursing, I went into management in the NHS, in the health service. So that's what made me become a kind of a manager and a director. And then one day I was asked to go and work for a charity. And the first charity I went to work for was one called Victim Support, that looks after people who are victims of crime. And then after that, I went to work for some cancer charities and some men's health charities, which obviously brought together having done nursing and working in charities. And then I was asked to take on the role at Dogs Trust, as I said earlier, 3.5 years ago. Really was very lucky and delighted to do it. I've always been an animal lover. I've had dogs and cats most of my life. So it's been a long journey, and it is a weird one to start as a nurse and end up as the Dogs Trust CEO. But I think what's true of all the jobs that I've done, it's actually about helping people and obviously helping dogs. But in many ways, most of the work we do at Dogs Trust, whilst we're there to help the dogs, we're actually there to help the people who have dogs in their lives. And often the times we're helping is when they've got problems. It might be when they become ill, or they've got problems financially, or other things happen in their life. So whilst it feels very different, in many ways, they've always been about trying to make people be in a position that they can have the best outcome. So yeah, it's a strange one. I never thought I'd end up at Dogs Trust when I started my nurse training, but here I am.
Yeah, you're kind of helping the people help the dogs. Yeah.
Exactly.
How has COVID affected the way that Dogs Trust was able to function, and also kind of how often people adopted dogs?
Yeah, so it's another great question. COVID was a really big thing for us. When COVID happened and we went into lockdown, we had to close all of our centres to the public. So we kept them open to look after the dogs, but people couldn't come. So for quite a long time, it was very difficult for people to adopt dogs from us. The other thing that's happened during the pandemic, I'm sure you might have heard about this in the news or on social media, is lots more people got dogs. So we think there are probably a couple of million more dogs in the UK now than there were at the start of the pandemic. And now we're in a time where there's lots of challenges with cost of living. We are seeing more and more people needing our help. So it was a difficult time. We always wanted to be there for the dogs, and we were there all the way through. But it meant for a long time the number of people adopting dogs from us reduced. And now we're at a time where we need people to adopt dogs more than ever, because we've got more dogs having to be given up. We're taking more phone calls than we've ever taken before from people who are struggling. We've had to establish things like food banks for dog food. We're trying to help people with vet costs. So it has been a really kind of busy few years in different ways. First off, it's very quiet because people couldn't come to us, and now it's really busy because people need our help more than ever. So yeah, it's been a hectic couple of years, let's say.
Okay, I've got another one.
Yeah.
Personally, I think Chihuahuas and any small breed of dog are adorable. But I was wondering what your favourite breed of dog might be. It could be like a cross. Yeah.
Now, you see, that's a question I'm not really allowed to answer, because obviously if you're a Dogs Trust, you'll have every breed of dog. But if you push me, I'm sure you would. So the first dogs that I owned were Golden Retrievers. So I'm a big fan of Golden Retrievers. I've also had a Labradoodle that was a great dog. But I currently have my first ever adopted dog from Dogs Trust. She's called Lexi. She is a Whippet Saluki, so she's quite small, with a long pointy nose. She's faster than the wind. She runs faster than any dog I've ever had. She's actually blind in one eye, which we think she was from birth. So I've had to get used to having a dog that's partially sighted, and that matters when you're out walking on the lead. You need to make sure she's on the right side of you. But I'm now a massive fan of Whippet Saluki crosses. But the truth is, all dogs are wonderful, and everybody has different views about it. And one of the things we always say at Dogs Trust is deed, not breed. So don't judge all dogs by the breed. Think about the right dog for you. And then, when you come to Dogs Trust, if you want to adopt a dog, we can talk to you about what's the sort of dog that you would like. Like, do you want a dog that needs lots of exercise? Do you want a bigger dog or a smaller dog? And then we have lots of dogs who are mixed breeds, and they can be fantastic family pets as well. So, I think I have to say I'm really, really like dogs that come from different backgrounds and have different histories, because they make life really interesting. But I'm a huge fan of all dogs, but I'm particularly a chairman of the fan of Whippet Saluki crosses at the moment.
It's like choosing your favourite child.
You can't do it. You're not allowed.
Well, you just did.
All right, don't say it.
It's okay, we won't tell anyone.
Excellent, thank you.
Florence?
Okay. I've got one.
Yeah.
What would you say the most discriminated breed of dog from your point of view is?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think you have to say it's what we might call the kind of the bull breed type dog. So, for example, dogs like Staffordshire Bull Terriers, American Bull Terriers. Often, people are worried about some of the bigger dogs that kind of get associated. People think of them as very aggressive. So often the case, they are absolutely not. In fact, some of them are probably some of the soppiest dogs you will ever meet. And if you go and ask a vet, they'll say that they've probably, they've had more problems with smaller dogs. But that's why we always say at Dogs Trust, it really is about deed, not breed. Don't lump all dogs into the same bracket. And it isn't usually about the breed. The reason that many dogs have challenges is the experiences they've had. They've probably had bad experiences throughout their life. And one of the things we do lots of work at Dogs Trust is to retrain them, to work with our behaviourists. And most dogs react badly because they're stressed, because they're scared, because they feel they're under threat. So that's why we always try not to over-categorise by breed. But I think you are right. There are discriminated dogs. And I know that lots of people kind of have a natural fear or think badly of kind of bull-type breeds of dogs, and we know them to be very much can be great pets, and it really is about working with the individual dog, not with the breed of them.
With dogs that have been illegally brought into the UK and breeds
Yeah.
that aren't allowed to be here, do you still offer homes to them and try to find them new homes, or what would you do with them?
Yeah, so in most cases we would. There are a few breeds of dog that, as you possibly know, are banned in the UK, and therefore we may not be able to rehome them. In those cases where that's the case, if we possibly can, we will keep the dogs with us and they'll stay with us for the rest of their life. So, for example, at a lot of our rehoming centres, we have what we call sponsor dogs. So they're dogs that are going to stay with us forever, and they're actually sponsored by members of the public. So if you go to one of our centres, you might meet one of our sponsor dogs, and they live in great kennels, and you'll see all around their wall, they've got cards from people that send them cards. At Christmas time, they get more Christmas presents than the rest of us all put together. So they are looked at very well. But we do a lot of work to rehome dogs that are illegally imported into the UK. So we work with the border authorities, who are the people that might seize the dogs at the ports or at airports. They'll go into one of our specialist rehoming centres. More often than not, and very sadly, those dogs are puppies. So they're brought in, sometimes they're brought in when the mums are pregnant and then are actually born here. So we will bring them up for the first part of their life, and then when they're ready to be rehomed, we will rehome them to people. So, and the type of dog at the moment that is most commonly imported is dachshunds. There are more dachshund puppies being imported than any other at the moment. So if you go to some of our specialist centres, we tend to, at various times, might have lots of dachshund puppies who are looking for new homes. So yes, we do help those dogs. And it's a really bad thing that dogs are being imported, not just because it's bad for the dogs. They have a really bad experience. They're often brought over in the back of vans or even in the boots of cars. But also there's a real risk around disease. So you might find dogs getting brought in that haven't had the right vaccinations. So they might have to stay with us for a long time to be treated for different diseases that they might have, to have lots of testing. And it's just a horrible experience for them. So we're working with government to try and get them to stop dogs being brought in illegally, and to increase the number of checks that happens at ports and airports. But until that day comes, we will be there to support those dogs when they come to us.
And also with the dogs that are being discriminated against, what can you do to kind of help improve the images of these breeds, and also try to find them long-lasting homes to convince people to take them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that can be done. One is what we try to do. So the first thing is we try to encourage people when they talk to us to not start with saying, oh, I want this sort of dog. So if they come to us and say, don't come to us and say, I want a brown Labrador or something like that. Come and say what sort of lifestyle you've got and how you want your dog to fit in. And then we will try and match people with dogs. And we won't start with the breed. We'll say, well, have you considered this type of dog? We can put you in touch. I mean, all of our staff at our rehoming centres are incredibly experienced, so they can give you lots of advice of, what it's like to live with dogs like that. We will give you a really good sense of that individual dog, so we will know a lot about that dog. The other thing is that we really want the people who've adopted dogs from us to champion it. So if, for example, you have got a dog that might be a less popular breed, if you talk about that dog on social media, if you talk to your friends and family about it, the more that we can all do a job to actually change the attitudes around dogs, that's a good thing. And I think it's just about us all keep talking about it, spreading the great experience that many of us have of having these different dogs in our lives, and just keep those messages coming out is always key, really. So it's really about trying to encourage people to not start with thinking, I want this sort of dog. Think about the actual ways that the dog will kind of add to your life. Then we can work out what dog, not what breed, is right for you.
Does Dogs Trust struggle to find homes for like senior and older dogs?
Yes, that can be a challenge. Lots of people, more people than not, are looking for puppies. or very young dogs. And people often think, well, the advantage of getting a puppy is that I'll know all about it and I'll start. But the reality is that when you get a dog from us, we will have done a really full assessment on the dog. So if it's an older dog, we'll know about its history. We'll have had it with us for a while and we'll know what it likes and it doesn't like. So it is a good thing often to get an older dog. Older dogs need to be looked after because sometimes they find that they, they may be, for example, be given up because they had an older owner who's become ill or passed away. So we need people to give those dogs a great life at the end of life. In one of our centres, our Shrewsbury Centre, we do actually have a specialist converted home that is just full of older dogs and they all live together and people can adopt from there. So we're always trying to encourage people to get older dogs. And there are groups of people who really just prefer to take on older dogs because they often need a little bit less exercise. They just need to be loved. They need a comfy sofa. And for those people that maybe can't do as much exercising as a dog, an older dog might be absolutely perfect for you. So a great example is a retired greyhound. Lots of people think greyhounds who they see running around the greyhound track would need loads and loads of exercise. Actually, older greyhounds don't need very much exercise at all. And the biggest challenge of having a greyhound is to get it off the sofa to go out for a walk. So they can make really brilliant pets for many people. But it's back to that thing about come and talk to us, tell us what your lifestyle is. And it may well be that an older dog is absolutely perfect for you.
For people that might have, for like elderly people and also maybe people with families, what kind of, other than making sure that you get the right dog for them, is there also any advice that you could get for or give for people that maybe in a bit of a situation where it's a bit more difficult to take care of a dog but they still want to adopt?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I think the first thing we all have to be honest about as potential owners is sometimes you're not in the right place in life to have a dog. It's a big commitment and you need to be ready. You can make that commitment and be honest with yourself and your family. Have you got the time to put into it? If it's limited, there are different things that you consider. So, for example, an older dog might be a good idea. Another possibility is you could foster dogs. If you're not able to have a dog all the time, we're always looking for foster carers. So some of the dogs that come into our care aren't going to do very well in kennels. And we try to get them into a foster home where they'll live until they find their forever owner. And so if you're able to maybe look after a dog for shorter spaces of time, that might be a brilliant thing to do. The other thing I would say is when you get a dog, however experienced as an owner you are, it's always a good thing to have some follow-up. So we do a thing called Dog School, which are classes that you go along to, and you can take a puppy or you can take an older dog to a dog school class. And we will work with you to help you understand your dog, to give you lots of tips about how you fit it into your life. And sometimes your dog might be struggling. There might be things that you're not getting on great with. We're always there to give advice. We have some brilliant behaviour staff who work all across Dogs Trust. We have loads of videos on our website, lots of information. We all, even if you're somebody who's had dogs all through your life, we all need to keep learning and we always need to keep adapting to the dog that we've got in our life and different circumstances. So keep asking for help is always a good thing. But it may be that at this particular point in time, if you're away a lot or something like that, it isn't fair to have a dog. You might want to contact your local Dogs Trust Centre and see if you can volunteer so you get a chance to go and walk dogs, or you go and see dogs. You might become a foster carer. You might want to look after a dog sometimes of a family member or a friend at the weekend. People are always looking for help. So there are ways you can have dogs in your life, and it might not be the exact right time to own a dog right now. And if you're honest with yourself, that's sometimes one of the best dog welfare things that you can do.
Okay. I have one as well. I've heard that many dogs, due to the cost of living crisis, are being left and abandoned. Could you tell us how you're helping people deal with that?
Yeah, it's really true, Florence. There are some really sad stories about dogs being abandoned. What we would always say to everybody is if you are struggling in any shape or form, please get in touch with organisations like Dogs Trust. If you go to the Dogs Trust website, you'll find our number on there. Give us a call. We will always see if there's anything we can do to help you keep the dog. So if you're struggling with cost, if you're struggling because you have got some behavioural problems, we will see if we can provide help. We will see if we can get you to talk to one of our staff who might be able to give you some tips and techniques. But if it is the case you can't keep your dog, then it's so much better to give them up to an organisation like Dogs Trust. Yeah. We will find them another home. We've got people who are looking for dogs to take on. So we will always say, the worst thing you can do is abandon a dog, give it up. That's a recipe for disaster. I know you might be in a really difficult circumstance, but please call us. We will try to do everything we can to help.
Mm. When you find dogs and you don't know any of their history and maybe they don't have any kind of information about them, what kind of health checks do you do on them to make sure that they aren't bringing any diseases into with other dogs? And also, is it always necessary to... Sorry, you go.
No.
Sorry.
No, I mean, it's a brilliant question. So if we don't know the history of the dog, we will run all the tests that we would do. So that might mean blood tests. It will certainly mean observing the dog and checking they haven't got any symptoms of any diseases. So we will always take the view that unless we know for sure they're cleared, we will assume until we've done the right check. So we would never rehome a dog until they've had all the relevant checks, and we will also make sure they've got all the relevant vaccinations and the likes around it. I have to be honest, obviously at any given point we have nearly 2,000 dogs in our care, so that it means we've got lots of dogs, and in our bigger rehoming centres that might be all over 100. It's always a concern for us that you can get diseases in dogs, and many of those dogs are infectious. If there's ever any sort of outbreak, we would isolate all the dogs that have been exposed to that to make sure they've had the medication and make sure that they're cleared. So we are very, very cautious about infectious disease. And the question that you asked earlier is really key to that. That is one of the big risks of dogs being illegally imported from abroad. They are at a much higher risk of having infectious diseases. So we have to keep those dogs for longer to make sure that we're 100% sure that they have cleared all the various checks that they need to have.
When the dogs do have infectious diseases, is there like a quarantine protocol for them?
Yeah, so we would close down the particular areas that they're in. We've got isolation units that those dogs would go into. So we are very cautious about it, and we would close off. And so at any given point, you might find part of our rehoming centre is not open to the public, and that's because there might be a suspicion of an outbreak. We will treat it. We will give the dogs all the medication they need, and we will only open that up again when we're absolutely clear that all the dogs have been given the all clear.
Okay. How do you reduce the risk of like infectious diseases entering the Dogs Trust anyway?
Yeah. Sorry, Florence. Carry on.
No, it's okay.
So yeah, I mean, the biggest way that you reduce the risk of infection is keeping everything very clean. So when you go to our rehoming centres, it's nearly always the case that you're seeing lots of cleaning going on. There's we don't have too many dogs in one area, so there's always sort of barriers between things. So if there is an outbreak, then we know it's limited to a smallish amount of space. But everything is very thoroughly cleaned between dogs. So once the dog's in one kennel, if it's then rehomed, the place is cleaned from top to bottom before the new dog comes in. We always, as I said, assume that a dog's coming in might have a disease until we know for sure it doesn't. So we'll treat it. So all of the staff will wear protective clothing, disposable aprons, and all of those and gloves and the sort of things that you would expect that we saw during the COVID outbreak. Those are things we're using all the time. So we always assume and keep things as cautious as possible. But the key thing is just keeping everything really well clean, which, as you can imagine, particularly in the winter, is not an easy job because having lots of dogs in one space, it all gets very mucky, very muddy, very quickly. But our staff are brilliant at constantly keeping everything clean and safe.
Oh, have you had any major incidents with the spreads of diseases in the kennels?
So we haven't had any for quite a long time, and that's because we do a lot, but I'm not complacent about that. Could have happened any time. Yeah. But we have had times where we've had to close down whole rehoming centres because there have been an outbreak of a few diseases, and we want to be sure. And if that happens, we will close an entire rehoming centre, and then we can make sure it's all cleared. So we've had some, and there haven't been any for a while, but in the previous years, we have had to close down rehoming centres for a period of time, but it's always something we're keeping a close eye on, and we're always ready to respond to if we had to. The other thing that we did quite recently last year was when the war in Ukraine started. We worked with the government and we brought in some of the dogs that came across from Ukraine, that came with the Ukrainian owners who were coming into the UK. So in a couple of our rehoming centres, we established specialist quarantine units. So those were buildings that were completely separate from the rest of all the other buildings. And those buildings were completely sealed off. And the dogs that were in there had to go through a period of clearing through quarantine. So if we need to, we can create completely separate spaces. And we did that for the dogs who were coming from Ukraine when the war started. So that's an example of it. So it wasn't a major incident, but we changed the way we work because the nature of the dogs that came in were different.
Okay. How many dogs on average do you have in all the dog trust centres at one time? Are there any years where you've had almost this is it, this is the max we can have?
Yeah, so we are at any given time, I would say that there's nearly about 2,000 dogs in Dogs Trust care. Now they're not all in the rehoming centres, so probably somewhere around about 1,500 would be in the rehoming centres, and the other 500 would be in foster homes. So they would be with our foster carers, but they're still technically under our care. So about 2,000 dogs. The reason that number changes is it depends how many of the dogs are able to be in a kennel with another dog. So obviously, if we've got lots of dogs that are happy being in a kennel space, then we can have more dogs. If the dog needs to be on its own, then you're going to be able to have fewer dogs at one given time. I would say, to be honest, we are pretty much at capacity now. We are at a level where we really can't take too many more dogs in. So it really is a case of almost one dog in, one dog out. And that's why it's really important that anybody who wants to rehome a dog from us comes and gets a dog, because you're not only doing a brilliant job by giving that dog a new home, you're opening up a space that means that we can take another dog in as quickly as possible. So we are pretty close to capacity at the moment. And the number of foster carers, people who support us in looking after dogs, is a huge help, because without those foster carers, we would be completely overwhelmed. So they are doing something truly fantastic, because they're essentially making us able to look after more dogs. So about 2,000 is really the limit of the number of dogs that we can have.
What are some other dog charities that people could, if they had a dog that they couldn't take care of and they needed to bring it to them, what are some other dog charities that maybe people could rely on as well as the Dogs Trust?
Yeah, so there's lots of great animal charities, and we work very closely with them, and other dog charities. So Dogs Trust is obviously the biggest dogs charity, and we just do dogs, as that kind of says on the tin. But obviously there's organisations like the RSPCA, who are there for all animals, Blue Cross. If you live in London, Battersea is obviously a famous and well-known place to go and get a dog or take a dog to in London, but they only operate in and around London mainly. But the other thing is there will be loads of great rescue organisations locally to you, and there are thousands across all of the UK. What I would suggest, if somebody wants to find out about that, there's an organisation called ADCH. So that's the Association of Dog and Cat Homes, ADCH. If you go to their website, they list all of their members. And so if an organisation is a member of ADCH, that means they've passed a certain level of checks to know that they look after the dogs well or the animals well. So it might not just be dogs, it might be cats. So if you go to their website, you can find out where there are shelters locally to you. So sometimes it's smaller charities who are doing a great job. We will often work with them. So it's always worth going and looking on the ADCH website, and that might give you some advice. And if you really are struggling and you need, we haven't got a centre near to you, you can always ring the Dogs Trust helpline, and we can point you in the direction of other charities in your local area.
How do you assess the training of the dogs when they come to you?
So we have specialist behaviour staff who work in every one of our centres. They work with the dog. They will do some basic checks. If the dog has come from somebody else's home and we know the owner, then we might know some of their history. So we might know that there was particular problems. So the behaviour staff will work on it. But there's a lot of checks that each of the staff do. They'll go through them. If the dogs are struggling, then they'll put some things in place. So they'll do things like take the dog out on the lead, see how it works on the lead, see how it is around other people, around other dogs, how good it is at coming back when you call it. So there's lots of work, and all of our staff are trained in that. And then we have very specialist behaviour experts who've done lots of training over years, have worked with thousands and thousands of dogs, and they are brilliant at assessing all of the dogs that they have. So there's a lot of effort goes into, and most dogs that come to us will be with us for at least a week or so. And during that time, they'll be doing lots of assessment to find everything out about that dog. The other thing is that once the dog's rehomed, we don't stop the journey. We know that we need to keep working with the owner. So we're there. You can come to dog school. You can always talk to us. We will ring you up several times after you've adopted a dog to see if there's anything else we can do to help. So there's lots of kind of follow-up that we do as well. But all of our dogs are really thoroughly assessed from the moment they come to us.
I know that your dog, you adopted one of your dogs from Dogs Trust. How did you come to meet her? And also, wait, was it a her?
It is a her, yeah.
Okay, sorry. How did you come to meet her? And also kind of, how well trained was she before you adopted her, and what was her situation beforehand?
Yes, and I love the fact that you're assuming she's brilliantly trained now, and I'm not sure that's entirely true. So my dog is called Lexi, and she's a Whippet Saluki cross. I have to make a confession now. I am a failed foster carer. So originally, Lexi came to me, and I was fostering her, and it was during quite early on in the pandemic, and I had contacted all of the Dogs Trust centres around me and said I'd be okay to be a foster carer. And so after a few days, I got a phone call from our rehoming centre in Basildon, which is in Essex, down quite near to London, to say that they just had this small dog brought in. She'd been brought into the rehoming centre by the police. She'd been found running down a road relatively near to the rehoming centre. So obviously had escaped or got away from somewhere. She had to stay at the rehoming centre for 7 days because they had to see if anyone was going to come and claim her. Nobody did come to claim her. So she then came to me as originally as a foster dog. So she was with me whilst we were looking for another home. She was very nervous. She'd obviously had some tough experiences. So it took a little while to get her used to being around people. She was particularly scared of men. So we did lots of work to get her exposed to people, took her back to the rehoming centre to meet other dogs. And then after a month or so, I rang up the rehoming centre and said I really would like to adopt her because she was really made a big difference to my life. So as I said, I'm a failed foster carer. I was supposed to be fostering her, but I became an adopter. So I adopted her a couple of years ago. She's a great dog. She is still quite nervous around other dogs. And we've done some work on that. And then, as I said earlier on, found out a while ago that she's blind in one eye. And that hasn't stopped her doing anything. But it does mean that you need to think about that. So when I'm out walking her, I need to make sure she's walking on the right side of me, because if her bad eye is on the wrong side and say she's next to a road, that can cause her to get quite nervous. So you just need to think about things like that when you've got a partially sighted dog. But no, she's been a fantastic addition to my life, and I'm very, very lucky to have her.
What did you mean when you said she isn't very well trained now? Is she very mischievous?
She's a little bit naughty, to be honest, and I'm probably a little bit soft. She can be a bit mischievous. She's generally very good. The other thing is I've never had so you call Whippets and Greyhounds, they get called sight hounds because they're dogs that are trained to respond and focus on that. They are so fast, and I've never had a dog that is as fast as she is. So you have to get very used to her being around your feet all the time. So you might I might be in the kitchen and look out and she's in the garden. And I think, oh, she's over there. And then like 1 second later, she's at your feet because she can just fly from one place to the other. So, yeah, she's not the perfectly trained dog, but she's doing pretty well. But she has got me wrapped around her paw a bit because I am a bit soppy when it comes to her.
I'm really sorry, but I think I might have accidentally unplugged my computer on the wall because the battery's running out and it's charged up. So is it okay if we just take a minute if I
of course
plug it back in? Thank you. Sorry.
It's all right.
Ugh.
You can tell there's lots of cables.
Yes, yeah. Well, we've all got lots of cables, and not plugging things in is a thing I forget to do all the time.
There we go. Thank you very much.
It's all right.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay, I'll go for the next question. Does Dogs Trust take any international work on, or is it in one area?
No, we do lots of international work. So there's different types of international work we do. So we are registered as a charity in Ireland, and we actually have a rehoming centre in Dublin. So that's technically an international charity. We also have quite a big team and do a lot of work in Bosnia. And we've been there for 10 years now. We went there after the war in Bosnia, and there were lots of displaced dogs. So they had a real problem with a very large number of stray dogs. So we've done lots of work in Bosnia over the last 10 years. But also we do lots of work with other charities all around the world. We particularly do quite a lot of work in India, in Thailand, parts of Africa, and we also do quite a lot of work in the USA. And particularly the work that we do in Africa, in India, and in Thailand is to eliminate rabies in dogs. So in some parts of the world, they still do have rabies. And rabies is a very, very dangerous disease. If you get bitten by a dog that has rabies, then it can be fatal. So we work with charities, but the good news is that if a dog is vaccinated, then you can eliminate rabies. So we do lots of work with that across the world.
Yeah, I heard the survival rate for rabies was 0. With a dog that has caught rabies, is it too late after they've caught it, or can you still vaccinate them and they'll be okay?
So you can treat dogs with rabies, but you have to catch them quite early on. So unfortunately, it often is a fatal disease for dogs. But also, if you get bitten by a dog that's got rabies, there's a relatively short window where you need to get treated as well. And obviously, in some parts of the world, that's very difficult. So, for example, in Africa, you might live more than a day's journey away from a hospital where you could get the rabies vaccine. So the best thing that you can do is vaccinate the population of dogs. So if you can vaccinate sort of something like 70-80% of the dogs in a particular area, then you will drive rabies out of all of that population. So I was lucky enough to be in India a couple of weeks ago, and I was in part of India called Goa. We've worked with one of our partners called Mission Rabies there, and they've eliminated rabies in all of Goa because they've vaccinated so many dogs. So it is a disease that we could get rid of if we put the effort into vaccinating enough dogs. And that's a big part of what Dogs Trust is doing going forward.
How many rehoming centres do you have in the UK and across? And are there any current plans to expand your business, or is it this is what we're doing and this is what we're good?
Yeah, so we have 21 rehoming centres across the UK, and then we have, as I mentioned, the centre in Dublin, Ireland. So that's all of the rehoming centres we have. we're not planning any new rehoming centres, but we are developing some of the ones that we've got, because some of them are quite old. And when we develop them, we might build more kennels. So the biggest development we're doing at the moment is at our centre in Northern Ireland, that's in Ballymena. And so we're doing a lot of work there, and we're doubling the size of it essentially. But going forward, we don't think the answer will be building more rehoming centres. We think the answer is to do more and more work through the community, to have more foster carers, to have more pop-up centres, to work with other organisations. So we're not going to keep building more rehoming centres, but we do want our services to be available to more and more people. So we've done a thing called the Home from Home project, and we've got 2 of them running at the moment, where we've recruited foster carers further away from our rehoming centres than we normally would. They are connected up with local vet practices, with other places where they can meet people to take the dogs on. So we are expanding what we do, but we're not going to do it by building many more rehoming centres.
Yeah. Okay. I think I only have 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead. Does the Dogs Trust rely mostly on public donations?
100% on public donations. We don't get any money from government. The only exception to that was when we did the work around the dogs from Ukraine. Government paid for some of that, but we completely rely on donations from the public, and we are very lucky that we have really loyal supporters who give us lots of money every year. But we couldn't do it without them. We don't get any official funding from anywhere else. So it's really important that people that do support us keep supporting us, because that's how we can carry on doing what we do. So it's 100% our funding comes from public donations.
Is there any particular times of the year where the charity struggles more to provide for dogs, and like maybe there's a peak in the amount of dogs that you have to take in, or like there's less donations?
Yeah, it's not so much less donations, but there absolutely is peak times of the year, and unfortunately we're about to head into it, because it's still the case, and we all do lots of campaigning against this, and you've probably heard us using the phrase "a dog is for life, not just for Christmas." But unfortunately, more people get dogs at Christmas time than any other, and they usually get a puppy, and then it's in the kind of into the springtime when people start to when they start to struggle. And so this time of year, people might have had a puppy for a long time. The puppy's getting bigger. They're struggling to look after it, and therefore they might be more likely to come to us. But we are very lucky. Our donors tend to give us money all across the year, but we often do find more people are giving up their dogs in the spring because they got them at Christmas time, and then they're now starting to struggle to cope. So this can be a bit of a busy time of year that we're about to go into.
Sorry.
Okay. Have you ever had to turn any dogs away because the rehoming centres are too full?
Unfortunately, that does happen sometimes. It's something we try to avoid. And if we can't take a dog in, we will try and work with partner organisations to see if there's space anywhere else. And sometimes we have to say to people, we can't take your dog straight away. If somebody is able to keep their dog for a little bit longer, and then we might get them in a little bit afterwards when the space opens up. So it might be the case that we couldn't take a dog on the very first day, but we might give somebody support to keep their dogs for a week or so until we can get a space for them. But unfortunately, we are getting to that stage where it is difficult. The other thing is we take in dogs that we believe one day we will be able to rehome. So sometimes there are dogs that if they've, for example, they've got really severe problems that we may not be able to ever rehome them. We might work with the owner to see if they could go to a sanctuary or something like that. So we are a rehoming organisation. So we only take dogs that we believe one day we can find a new home for. So we try hard not to turn dogs away, but we can't take every single dog. But we will always talk to owners to see what the best solution is for them.
With volunteering and like staffing issues, how can people apply to volunteer if they aren't prepared to do things such as like foster? Yeah. And also, do you ever have any issues where you have like a shortage of people working at the rehoming centres?
So we're very lucky. We have a great network of volunteers, and they are really brilliant, and we couldn't do what we do without them. We're always looking for more volunteers, and there are loads of different ways that you can volunteer at Dogs Trust. I would always encourage you, if you want to volunteer, get in touch either with your local rehoming centre or go to our website, and I think you'll see the banner there with the address, but go to the website and you'll get there any which way. But it isn't even just at the rehoming centre. So, for example, we have charity shops. We have people who might do some driving for us. We might have people who do work around some of our centres but don't work with the dogs. They might do some gardening. We've got a lot of grass, as you can imagine, so we often need help cutting the grass, cutting the hedges. We have brilliant volunteers. We even have volunteers who come in and help us do the laundry. You can imagine how much washing we have to do every day with all the dogs and their blankets. So all of those things are really, really important to us, and anybody who can give us any time is really, really much appreciated. We also have volunteer fundraisers, people who go out and raise money for us, spread the word. All of those people are absolutely essential to what we do. So if you are interested in volunteering, go to our website or give your local rehoming centre a ring. Every rehoming centre has a volunteer coordinator who can talk to you and see if it's something that you might be able to do for us.
I think that might be all of the questions that I have for today, unless Florence has any more.
I have one more. What career opportunities would be open for the Dog Trust? It's very similar to Emily's, I know, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, obviously volunteering at Dogs Trust is a great way to start and to get to know us. But we do have lots of people working for us, and lots of people who work from us have really built careers. And there are loads of different types of things that you can do in an organisation like ours. Obviously, the most obvious one is working with the dogs. And we have the people who work in our rehoming centres we call canine carers. And if you become a canine carer, you can progress through different grades and get different levels of experience and do different qualifications. And then we have people who've become behaviourists, and they do even more qualifications. Obviously, we have things like vets and vet nurses who are working for us, but we also have people who work in fundraising, who might work in some of our offices. They might be IT workers. There might be people who are doing things like finance jobs, even people like me who are doing management jobs. So there's a whole plethora of things that people do at Dogs Trust. If you are interested in it, then there are often opportunities. If you live close to a rehoming centre, it's always worth looking on their website, seeing what adverts are coming up. Come along and talk to people at the rehoming centre. They can explain the sort of jobs that we have. But as Emily was talking about before, you can start off volunteering in Dogs Trust, and it's a good way to understand what it is that we do, and it is a place that you can build a great career.
And just before we go, I just want to say that everybody should look at the Dogs Trust website and see what dogs are up.
Thank you very much for being here today.
It's been my pleasure. It's been really great to meet you both. And thank you for some really great questions. They were really good.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.